Good morning, Mike. How are you doing today? How's the weather in your neck of the woods? Keith, good morning, sir. Hey, I have books. Andy, that's good to hear. So, who's our sound engineer today? The audio good? Anybody want to chime in and make sure we've got good audio for you this morning? Anybody?
Say hello to a new friend on an old road. Take a two-lane trip of memories into mysteries unknown. Come along for the ride. Jim Hinckley's America. Jim Hinckley's America.
Hey, good morning, mi amigos. There's a definite hint of spring in the air here in Kingman, even though the ground had a faint dusting of snow this past Tuesday. So, how is everyone doing this beautiful, beautiful morning? Good, I hope. This week on Coffee with Jim, I'm going to be sharing a bit of the colorful history of Kingman, Arizona, my adopted hometown. And I'll be sharing a few of the special places that are often overlooked. You know, I think most everyone's been through Kingman at least once. It's the crossroads of some major highways, but you know, it's been a transportation hub for more than 125 years. As far as transportation corridors go, there's evidence that probably 1,000 years of history here. The links of transportation history predate this town by centuries. They're found in the canyons and valleys that embrace the town. Kingman may best be known for its connection to Route 66, resultant to that catchy little tune about getting your kicks on Route 66. But the town also has a rich and colorful celebrity history. The most obvious evidence of this is the Route 66 corridor that is signed as Andy Devine Avenue. In a 1955 episode of the television program This Is Your Life, Front Street was renamed to honor the town's favorite son. Devine was a prolific actor that starred in hundreds of movies and television programs from the 1920s through the 1970s. If you're an Andy Devine fan or don't know who Andy Devine is, do a Google search. You'll be really quite surprised by what a prolific career he had. Devine was born in Flagstaff, but the family moved to Kingman in 1906 when his father, Thomas Devine, purchased the Hotel Beale. Just a little bit of a historic footnote, if you will. Thomas Devine was a member of the Good Roads Association, and he played a role in having the National Old Trails Road rerouted across northern Arizona. Originally, it cut diagonally across the state from Springerville to Ocean Highway at Yuma. And that's why the Madonna of the Trail statue that is in each of the states along the National Old Trails Road corridor. In Arizona, it's located in Springerville. And the old Hotel Beale figures prominently in the town's celebrity history. The earliest film to be shot in the Kingman area that I'm aware of is Ace of the Saddle, starring Harry Carey. It was filmed in 1918 near Hackberry, Arizona. But Carey and his crew, they actually stayed at the Hotel Beale. And so did Buster Keaton and his crew when they were filming Go West in 1925 at Tap Duncan's Ranch north of Kingman. Tap Duncan's Ranch is now the old Diamond Bar is Grand Canyon Western Ranch, kind of a dude ranch, headed up towards Grand Canyon West. And when it comes to seeing Kingman and Route 66, as it was, there are two films that I highly recommend. One is Edge of Eternity, filmed in 1959. This movie was filmed almost entirely in Kingman and the surrounding area. As a bonus, it's actually a pretty darn good movie. The acting, cinematography, and well-written script, it makes for a good package. The second movie is Roadhouse 66, filmed in Kingman in 1984. The story is a bit cheesy. The acting isn't much better. And I have a feeling that William Dafoe and Judge Reinhold would really prefer that people did not see this movie. But it gives a good look at Kingman just after Route 66 was bypassed. It's a story for another day, but I had the privilege of working on this film. And that was an interesting and educational experience. As I was a newlywed, the pay was greatly appreciated, and the food was absolutely superb. Kingman also figures in some great stories about celebrities. The Western writer Louis L'Amour did a bit of boxing in Kingman. Jack Dempsey had car trouble here in Kingman. In March of 1939, Clark Gable and Carol Lombard were married in Kingman, and Pamela Anderson had an encounter with the police resultant of a bit of indecent exposure during a Playboy photo shoot. And before you ask, no, I do not have photos. Okay, that's a bit of a long-winded introduction. And before we get to the feature presentation this morning, I need to take care of a bit of business. First, I want to give a hearty thank you to the boys of the road crew for our theme song. And I'd like to give a shout out to a couple of our sponsors. Let's see, we have the one and only Wagon Wheel Motel in Cuba, Missouri. Can a Route 66 adventure be considered complete without a stay at this little gem and a morning visit with Connie? Then we have Route 66 Navigation, the best offline turn-by-turn navigation app for a Route 66 adventure. As a bonus, I helped develop the point of interest file, so it's sort of like having me as your personal tour guide, but without the gum beating. Then we have Gilligan's Route 66 Tours. This company has pioneered an innovative self-drive option, but they also offer an excellent guided tour, and both ensure that you get the best possible Route 66 experience. And as a bonus, you get to meet with me, regardless of the option you select. And just as with PBS, we depend heavily on the support of viewers. Excuse me. As our way of saying thank you, exclusive content is provided on the Patreon-based crowdfunding website. Kingman was founded as a railroad town, and the railroad is still a big part of the town. We're located on a main line between Los Angeles and Chicago. There's Amtrak service. And for train buffs, there's an almost endless stream of trains through town that you can photograph. with the stunning landscapes that surround Kingman as a backdrop. That makes for some really great photo ops. And hopefully it will survive COVID. Right now it's still temporarily closed. There's a nice railroad museum in the old depot. And that's where I usually kick off my historic district walking tours. In 1882, Conrad Shenfield, a railroad contractor, established a construction camp at the present town site south of Beale Springs for the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad. This was a predecessor of the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad. The town is actually named for Lewis Kingman, a railroad survey engineer. And the town quickly grew to be an important hub and transportation center for development of area ranching and mining. And from the Harvey House to the three depots, two of which burned, the town pretty much developed around the railroad. And of course, what railroad history is not complete without stories of train wrecks? And over the years, there's been some real doozies. Some of them were right downtown. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, that's going to have to be a story for another day. Often overlooked in the telling of America's story is the prehistory and the rich, colorful history of Native American cultures. North of Kingman, near the ghost town of Mineral Park in the Surbet Mountains, is a rich turquoise mine. In the 1920s, the Smithsonian Institution did an archaeological survey in the area, and they found ample evidence that linked this mine with ancient Toltec and Aztec culture in Central America. There was also an extensive trade network of trade routes that linked the Pacific coast near modern Los Angeles with the cities such as Gran Quivira and Pecos in New Mexico. And apparently, Kingman area turquoise was traded all along this route. But here's something that I recently discovered, and this is really mind-boggling. There are vague archaeological hints uncovered in the last few years that hint that this Native American trade work may have connected all the way to the Mississippian culture, best known as the mound builders, that produced major metropolitan areas in the Mississippi River Valley in the pre-Columbian era. Some of this is preserved at Cahokia Mound State Historic Site near Collinsville, Illinois, south of East St. Louis. If you get a chance, that's a great little Route 66 deal, short detour, well worth checking out. This east-west trade corridor across the deserts of California, northern Arizona, and into New Mexico, for obvious reasons, that was followed by many of the early explorers, American and Spanish. The Father Garces expedition of 1776 followed this trail, and they camped in the area of Beale Springs. And some portions of the trail were used by Lieutenant Beale and the road he established. And then that was followed by the railroad, the National Trails Road, and Route 66. For obvious reasons, one of the reasons that people followed these trails is it was a lot of water holes along the way. And of course, in the desert, you want water holes. This is one of the great gems we have in Kingman, and it's expanding and growing. The Surbet Foothills Recreation Area that embraces Kingman on the north is a delightful urban paradise. There are more than 35 miles now of scenic hiking and biking trails. And there are also desert oases like Beale Springs and Johnson Canyon. And there's vestiges of old roads and Wallapai encampments. Coyote Pass that cuts through the center of the Surbet Foothills Recreation Area is literally the crossroads of the past, present, and future in Kingman. You have right near Fort Beale, the site of old Camp Beale Springs. Of course, you have US 93, the major highway connecting Kingman with Las Vegas. And very soon, I-11 will be going through this pass. Almost parallel to US 93, you can find remnants of the Native American trade route, remnants of US 466. You can find part of the territorial era Mojave Prescott Road and an automobile road to connect Kingman with the mining town of Chloride that was built in 1913. If you visit Kingman and the schedule allows, I highly recommend that you stretch the legs a bit in the area of Beale Springs. It's less than 4 miles from the historic business district, and the springs itself is about 100 yards from the parking lot. Real easy to access. The sense of history here is just palpable, and there are some stunning landscapes that I just don't see how you can take a bad photograph out there. Just a hint of how beautiful this area is. A travel writer recently referred to the Monolith Gardens section as a miniature monument valley. Routing of the National Old Trails Road through Kingman gave the town a real boost, and it spawned establishment of a service industry that grew exponentially as the number of travelers following this road became a tsunami. Just one example. In 1915, when Edsel Ford made a pit stop at the Brunswick Hotel in Kingman during a trip with his college buddies to the Panama Pacific Exposition, there were more than 20,000 people from outside California that drove to the event. Many of them followed the National Old Trails Road because, just as with Route 66 travelers, this was the gateway to natural wonders such as the Grand Canyon, Petrified Forest, and Painted Desert. But the trip was not for the faint of heart. During the months of summer, people were fined for trying to cross the California desert with women or children in the vehicle. This is the Automobile Blue Book was a kind of a standard road guide of the period. And you can see a partial list of recommended equipment for the motorist. It's pretty astounding. They also recommended carrying a pistol, ammunition, block and tackle, rope. You had to be prepared because it was still, when you were driving across the deserts, it wasn't much difference between then and the 19th century. Supplying this equipment as well as food and repairs became big business, not just in Kingman, but all along the route. And one of the things that amazes me about Kingman is how many automobile dealerships and garages were operating in Kingman between 1910 and 1925. And I know there's more that I've missed, but I know that there was sales and service in Kingman for Packard, Chalmers, Star, Studebaker, Ford, Mack, Buick, Cadillac, Oldsmobile, and even Romer. And Romer was a pretty obscure car, even when it was new. And there was another industry fueled by the development and increased use of the National Old Trails Road. This was trucking. Kingman became an early hub for Western Arizona trucking. And I have trouble imagining what an amazing experience it must have been for travelers that passed through Kingman in these years. Speaking of trucking, years ago I interviewed the Shuey family. They were based out of Needles, California. And for those familiar with the Black Mountains going through Oatman, and you have trouble visualizing big trucks taking that road, they didn't. And Highway 93 didn't go south through Burrow Creek and the Big Sandy for years to come. So in the pre-war years especially, you would follow Route 66 to Ash Fork and then south through Prescott down Yarnell Hill to Phoenix and across the desert. Well, the Shuey family hatched up a pretty brilliant scheme. They had a market in Needles, California, selling produce that they'd picked up in Los Angeles. Then they had a contract supplying central commercial stores in Oatman and Kingman with produce. Well, what they started doing in addition to this was they kept several 2-ton flatbed trucks in Needles and Kingman, and for a set fee, a trucking company could save hundreds of miles. They could run their trucks to Kingman. The Shuey family would offload onto their trucks, drive them through where they could be picked up in Needles. You know, when you think about it, when we were talking about Edsel Ford, in 1915, Arizona had been a state for only 3 years. There were still stagecoaches operating at this period. Then you had trucks such as this beast on the road. And the road conditions were so poor that Edsel Ford considered it a good day's run when he made it from Williams to Kingman in just over 12 hours. That was a distance of about 150 miles. There's an excellent time capsule west of Kingman. With the exception of a pavement, this section of road is exactly as it was in 1918. Even the railroad bridges with the Santa Fe logo are just as they appear in picture postcards from that period. If you want to experience this, what you do when you're in Kingman, you head south across the tracks on 4th Street at the depot. Drive a few blocks and then follow the road as it gently curves to the right over a small bridge. You'll see a sign that reads Old Trails Road. This is a paved road. The drive ends about 5 miles west of town, but I highly recommend it. This was the National Old Trails Road until 1926 and Route 66 until 1937. There's another great little time capsule drive in Kingman. It's Chadwick Drive. This loops around El Trovador Hill instead of the big, steep 4-lane drive going into downtown Kingman. The area around the 1939 El Trovador Motel along Route 66 was once known as the unincorporated community of El Trovador. In the late 1930s, there was a sign at the top of the hill that announced this in neon. It said, "Welcome to the unincorporated community of El Trovador." The sign was a temporary project with the Mojave Museum of History and Arts. It was restored by Route 66 Association of Kingman and Legacy Signs. And the sign restored is on the west wall of Legacy Signs. And that is just half a block to the east of the town's signature water tanks along Andy Devine Avenue, which is Route 66. And there are photos in the museum archives that show runners participating in the Bunyan Derby, the famous transcontinental foot race of 1929, struggling to pull this hill on what is now Chadwick Drive. There are also remnants from a huge billboard, and I've long wondered what it was promoting, but I haven't found a photo. The bottom photo on the left is the road west that I mentioned from downtown Kingman along 4th Street. And on the right, that's the National Old Trails Road along South Front Street into Slaughterhouse Canyon. That's now known as Topeka Street. This section of road was bypassed with a realignment in 1921 that put the road up El Trovador Hill along what is now Chadwick Drive. Your top pictures, 4th and Front Street was the location of one of the town's first service stations and the first iteration of the Packard dealership in Kingman. There were several over the years. Sandwiched between the gas station and a cafe was a free campground. And there was a recent discussion about this campground on a Facebook page about Kingman history that Andy Sansom has together. Free campgrounds were a very, very big part of travel. Communities wanting to capitalize on the growing number of travelers on the National Old Trails Road often established free campgrounds. Some were a little more than a clearing. Others offered water, toilets, showers, and even small cabins. The secondary reason for establishment of campgrounds was to address the growing concerns about people camping on every vacant lot in town. To give you an idea how much automobile camping was a big part of the traveling experience, Henry Ford, Harvey Firestone, and Thomas Edison outfitted custom campers and would often make excursions into northern Michigan. Edsel Ford's journal, he notes the group's many camping adventures. The reason for their stay at the Brunswick Hotel was a late arrival. Otherwise, they would most likely have availed themselves of the free campground. The Kingman Ford Agency was established in 1911 It was visited by Edsel Ford during his tour. This was located across from the depot near the Commercial Hotel. This is about a block east of the Hotel Beale, for those familiar with Kingman. And a bit of shameless self-promotion here, but I offer an illustrated historic business district walking tour, and I use hundreds of photos from the archives of the Mojave Museum of History and Arts to kind of bring it to life. For more information, you can contact me or Bob Walton at Desert Wonder Tours. A link to his website and contact information is posted on our website at jimhinckleysamerica.com. After 1946, the Ford facility became a GM dealership, with the emphasis on Pontiac. Most of the buildings in this picture are still existent. The facades have been altered so they're not easily recognized. I really am partial to this photo. I like the rich details, like the Route 66 sign on the phone pole. This would have been taken almost immediately in front of the railroad depot on 4th and Andy Devine. The reason that this facility went from Ford to GM is that an all-new state-of-the-art facility had been built far to the west along Front Street. Which is Route 66, Andy Devine Avenue in 1946. Taylor Owen Ford was a relatively short-lived endeavor at this location. It was purchased in late 1946 by N.R. Dutton. N.R. Dutton had purchased a gas station and garage in Gold Road back in the mid-1920s. And the site along Route 66 is still there, but it's just a concrete slab with the old hydraulic hoist as standing in mute testimony. That service station is mentioned in A Guide to Highway 66 by Jack Rittenhouse that was published in 1946. It's noted that the garage offered a towing service over the steep grades of Sitgreaves Pass. Roy Dutton was a tow truck driver at the garage. N.R. was his uncle, and N.R. also built Cool Springs Station along Route 66 in about 1926. Roy became involved with the dealership in Kingman and eventually became the owner-manager. And it continued to serve as a Ford agency into the late 1950s. Then it was an Edsel facility. And finally, it became a full-line GM store. And today it is a classic car facility, Dutton Motors Dream Machines. It's also headquarters for the Route 66 Association of Kingman. It has a Willem Bohr diorama of Mr. D's on display. Scott Dutton, Roy's son, is the president of that organization. By the way, Roy is the D in Mr. D's. And before I get too far off there, I also want to mention it's a car museum. It's a great place to take a look at. After the bypass of Route 66, the historic business district went into a tailspin. Businesses closed, buildings were demolished, but starting in 2014, after the Route 66 International Route 66 Festival, a renaissance of sorts commenced. And man, this is really evident on Beale Street, one block off Route 66. You have art galleries, microbreweries, a wide range of eclectic shops, restaurants, wine bar. And even though we've lost some great little gems, great buildings, there's quite a few that remain. As an example, the El Palacio Restaurant on the corner of 4th Street and Andy Devine Avenue. This is housed in one of the oldest commercial buildings in Kingman. And as a bonus, they have excellent Mexican food. The building dates to about 1899. Until the early 1990s, it was a drugstore. A soda fountain was added in 1920. That fountain was preserved and recreated as the bar for the El Palacio. Things changed little in Kingman for decades. That was one of the reasons I became so enamored with this town. When I first moved here in the summer of '66, it seemed like the place warned about in Sunday school. But it was places like Kingman Drug and Jan's Soda Fountain that changed my thinking. When my father-in-law and mother-in-law were courting, this was their hangout. And when my dearest friend and I were courting, This was a hangout for us as well. We'd have a cherry Coke and a burger and walk up the street to the State Theater. Another time capsule, a lot of people know about this one. Mr. D's Route 66 Diner. This world-famous eatery was transformed into a caricature of the 1950s diner back in the 1990s. But hiding under the colorful facade is the real deal. This place opened in 1939 as the Chemo Cafe and a Shell station with garage. KI was for Kingman and MO was for Mojave County. It's real easy to kind of date this picture. You can see how new the building looks. The Plymouth is about 1940, and the house in the background was torn down in 1946 to build Taylor Owen Ford. Another gem is the Old Trails Garage, built somewhere around 1916. The facade and a circa 1930 Packard sign were renovated in a partnership between the owners and the Route 66 Association of Kingman. There's a story and mystery behind the Packard sign, and if we ever get that totally sorted out, I'll share that with you too. And Kingman, we mentioned transportation, but Kingman has a very, very rich history. Aviation history. The first airfield was established along Stockton Hill Road near the present-day Mountain View Cemetery. This was back around 1919. There's a bit of trivia to fill your head with useless knowledge. This was the airfield for the crew that completed the first aerial survey of the Grand Canyon. The second airfield was established as Port Kingman by the pioneering passenger air service company TAT, Transcontinental Air Transport. Charles Lindbergh was involved with this endeavor and was a frequent guest at the Hotel Beale as he was overseeing construction. Amelia Earhart was here for the ribbon cutting. And a little bit of a footnote, the terminal building still survives to this day. It is the offices for the Brown Drilling Company. Western Air Express was also established at an airfield near Kingman in the late 1920s. This site was largely engulfed by creation and development of the Kingman Army Airfield along Route 66 in 1942. This became one of the largest flexible gunnery schools in the country at the time. By flexible gunnery, what they mean is air-to-air, air-to-ground, and ground-to-air. And they also trained navigators at the airfield. After the war, it was designated a storage depot for the salvage of bombers, cut up for scrap metal mostly. And Arizona Highways back in 1947 did an article about this as being the largest collection of military aircraft in the world. As this was a training facility, there were a number of just horrific accidents. And at the terminal building and cafe, which is a surviving vestige from the airfield, recently renovated, I might add, the original control tower shadows monuments that commemorate several of these incidents. The little cafe out there is well worth a visit, especially for breakfast. Excellent food. But Route 66 is why so many people know Kingman. And of course, there are lots and lots of links to the town's association with that storied highway. Two places of particular note are the White Rock Court and the El Trovador Lodge. The White Rock Court was built in 1936 by Conrad Minka, and it was the only motel in Kingman listed in the Negro Traveler's Green Book. And the only other motel to offer service to African Americans through the early 50s was Hood's Court. This motel and grocery store is located near the Dam Bar restaurant. The Arcadia Lodge is a bit rough around the edges, but it's another tarnished gem. It dates to the 1939, and a recent study noted that authentic Route 66 motels are the most endangered properties along the highway corridor, and Kingman has them in spades. The Siesta Motel dates to 29. The Hilltop Motel being renovated, it dates to 1955. The Roadway Inn opened as a Ramada Inn in 1964. The Ramada Inn opened as a Holiday Inn in 1964. The Ramblin' Rose is a former travel lodge, and the sharp-eyed traveler will notice that the logo still adorns the railings. And all along Andy Devine are motels that date to the period between 1930 and 1965. But Kingman is more than just historic sites. It's a town seasoned with colorful characters. And I've been accused once or twice of being one of those colorful characters. It's also fascinating chapters of obscure history. Did you know that George Grantham arranged for some major league teams to play in Kingman? He played for several teams during the 1920s, major league teams, New York Giants, Pittsburgh Pirates. He is interred in the Mountain View Cemetery here in Kingman. Well, we're starting to run over time a little bit, and I do apologize. I hope we're not keeping you too long. But before I wrap this up, I want to give a shout out to Victoria's Sugar Shack. It's my go-to place for a sweet treat. My dearest friend and I enjoy an early morning date every once in a while. And I have a new favorite here, her award-winning pumpkin coffee cake. She just took, Victoria just won a national baking contest sponsored by Pillsbury for that. Next week on Coffee with Jim, I hope you can join us. I'll be sharing a few of my favorite places in Albuquerque and perhaps inspire a bit of urban exploration. And I hope that you can join us. Invite your friends. Let's make it a coffee party. Before we get to your questions, this is our trivia question for the day. The Highway House, this motel in Albuquerque, do you know what the connection is to a major, how do we put this? A major development, if you will, a transformative development in post-war Arizona. Any ideas? If you've got the answer, I'll get you a defaced copy of 100 Things to Do on Route 66 Before You Die. And like I say, I'll deface it with my signature. It's always good to have everybody join us this morning. We got Andy from Tucson and Keith from Kingman. And Mike's with us this morning. Good morning, Laura. Michael Fennessy's with us. One Stop 66. Hey, check out onestop66.com. All your Route 66 Centennial stuff. That's everything you need. And Walt's with us. Walt does such a great job. If you get a chance down at the Benelli House in Kingman, take a tour with Walt as your guide. And a lot of fun. A lot of fun. You can see a short video we did on that working with My Marketing Designs and the Bee, a little bit of a teaser. And I was down there yesterday with a film crew from Fast TV. Good morning, Miss Maggie from Michigan. Stephen, all the way from England. God bless. Good to have you with us this morning. Jim Carter from Kentucky. David's with us. Good. Laura, you know, I might, but I just might. We'll have to talk about that. I'm glad it's a beautiful morning there in Aurora, Illinois. Good morning, Sandra. How are you today in Clemens? Yeah, Andy Devine was a one of a kind. Thank you. Kingman Connects. I will take a look at that. Miss Michelle from California. Yeah, Andy, I understand Charles Bronson was stationed at the Kingman Army Airfield, and I understand Clayton Moore was out there too. Well, if you're a train buff, Kingman's where you need to be. Angela, I look forward to the visit. We'll have to see you here or there. Angela, for folks who don't know, Angela is the proprietor at the historic Cactus Inn Motel in McLean, Texas. And I'm eager to stop by there. I'm glad to see her doing this. McLean is a bit rough at the edges, but boy, there's a lot to offer. Don't laugh, but the Devil's Rope Museum, a museum dedicated to barbed wire, is in McLean. It is actually it's actually pretty interesting. Yeah, Andy, to the best I can discern, Mojave Prescott Road and the Hardee's Toll Road did go through Coyote Pass and by Beale Springs. Well, Laura, God bless. I hope to autograph your books for you. Murder and Mayhem. I hope it doesn't keep you awake at night. Yeah, I saw your post, Nolan, yesterday, and I hadn't had a chance to respond. I'd been out and about with the Fast TV network people doing a episode. One of the buildings does survive. I have a long association with the old Hobbs Flying A truck stop that I'll have to share sometime. When I used to come in off the ranch, I would stop in there for fueling up the trucks and breakfast. But the brass rail, the restaurant, the cafe building is still there. It is now the Kia store. It was the Penske truck leasing shop and store, and now it's the Kia store. It's been given a new facelift and a facade. But when I worked in that building a few years ago as the Penske, the old fuse box was still in the kitchen, and it had markings for fryer and all the different the freezers. And yeah, it's still there. Most everything else was gone. And then when they built Martin Swaney Chrysler, they bulldozed a garage that been built after, but the old grease pits and everything from the truck stop were filled and buried. But I saw your question. I just hadn't been able to get back to you yet. Now that's the difference, Stretch, Andy. I did not know that Clayton married a local gal. Well, that's most interesting. Well, do we have any other questions I can answer for you folks? Anything I can do? Yeah, Nolan, it's like I say, and there's a couple other things there. If you go just to the west of the used car lot at Martin Swaney, you can still find some telephone poles, the stumps that are burned from that explosion. The tire store that was on the property to the west of the truck stop was gone. The safe was still in the ground until they paved and dug that up and paved that for the car lot. And where Napa was a Whiting Brothers station at the time. Guys, I really appreciate it. It's been really fun this morning. I'm glad you could join us. I hope you can come to Kingman sometime, discover some of the things that make this space special. And I do hope that you can join us next week. We're going to be doing a adventure in Albuquerque. Take care, my friends. Until we meet again, vaya con Dios. And don't forget that trivia question. We'll see you next week, my friends. Invite your friends. Let's make it a coffee party. Vaya con Dios, mi amigos.